The sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of El Paso, Texas, as Penelope Zimmerman clutched her threadbare carpetbag and tried to keep her oversized dress from slipping off her bony shoulders. The year was 1876, and the journey west had stolen everything from her: her family, her strength, and the flesh from her once healthy frame. Penelope had arrived on the afternoon stage, the last passenger to step down onto Texas soil. The dress that had fit perfectly when she'd left Philadelphia 6 months ago now hung on her like a child playing dress-up in her mother's clothing. Consumption had taken her parents, and grief had whittled away at her body until she was hardly more than skin and bones. "Madam, you look like you could use some assistance." The deep voice startled her, and Penelope turned to see a tall man with kind eyes watching her from beneath the brim of a worn leather hat. His weathered face was tanned from years under the western sun, but his smile seemed genuine. "I'm quite all right, thank you," she replied, though the slight sway in her stance betrayed her words. The cowboy stepped closer, taking in her appearance with a careful gaze. "Begging your pardon, but you don't look all right. That dress was too big and you're about to faint dead away in this heat." Penelope opened her mouth to protest, but the world tilted suddenly, and she felt strong arms catch her before darkness claimed her vision. When she awoke, she was lying on a bed in a simple but clean room. A woman with gray-streaked hair was placing a cool cloth on her forehead. "There you are, dear. Had us worried for a spell." "Where am I?" Penelope asked, her throat dry as the Texas landscape. "You're at the Willow Creek Ranch. My name's Martha. I help run things around here with Mr. Hayes Wilson." The woman offered Penelope a glass of water. "He brought you here after you collapsed in town, said he couldn't just leave you there." The door opened, and the cowboy from town entered, removing his hat as he stepped inside. "Good to see you awake, Miss Zimmerman." "Penelope Zimmerman," she answered, trying to sit up but finding herself too weak. "Hayes Wilson, madam. This is my ranch." He moved closer, and Penelope could see that beneath the trail dust, he was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30 or so. "If you don't mind my saying, you look like you've had a rough time of it." Penelope felt tears welling in her eyes, but she blinked them away. "My parents died of consumption on the journey west. I was going to meet my uncle in San Antonio, but his letters stopped coming. I've been traveling for 6 months, taking odd jobs when I could." Hayes nodded, his expression serious. "Well, Miss Zimmerman, you're welcome to stay here until you're back on your feet. My ranch hands and I can make inquiries about your uncle." He glanced at her thin frame and added gently, "Your dress was too big. We'll fill you with good meals and better days." Something in his tone made Penelope believe him, despite all the disappointments life had dealt her. She managed a small smile. "Thank you, Mr. Wilson. I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness." "Don't you worry about that now," Martha interjected, fluffing Penelope's pillow. "First thing is to get some meat on those bones." For the first time in months, Penelope felt a flicker of hope. The following days passed in a haze as Penelope recovered her strength. Martha brought her hearty meals 3 times a day: venison stew, fresh bread with honey, and eggs from the ranch's hens. Hayes checked on her each evening, sharing stories about the ranch and listening with genuine interest when she felt strong enough to tell him about her life in Philadelphia. "I was a teacher," she explained on the 4th day, sitting up in bed while sipping a mug of coffee. "I taught children to read and write. It wasn't much, but I loved it." Hayes leaned against the doorframe. "We could use a teacher around these parts. Most folks don't have proper schooling." A week after her arrival, Penelope was strong enough to join Martha and Hayes for supper in the ranch house's modest dining room. The table was laden with roasted chicken, potatoes, and fresh vegetables from Martha's garden. "You're looking better already," Hayes observed as Penelope took her seat. Her cheeks had begun to fill out, and a hint of color had returned to her face. "I feel better, thanks to you both." She smoothed down the front of a dress Martha had altered for her, one of the older woman's own that had been taken in considerably. As they ate, Hayes explained more about the ranch. "We run about 300 head of cattle. I've got 6 ranch hands who help with the herd and the horses. Been building this place up since '68 after the war." "Did you fight?" Penelope asked carefully. Hayes nodded once, his expression momentarily distant. "Union cavalry. Came out here afterward looking for something different." Martha cleared her throat. "Hayes took me in after my husband passed. Been his housekeeper these past 5 years. The ranch would fall apart without Martha," Hayes said with a smile, the darkness clearing from his eyes. "She keeps us all in line." After dinner, Hayes invited Penelope to sit on the porch. The evening air was cool and the vast Texas sky stretched endlessly above them, stars twinkling like diamonds scattered on black velvet. "It's beautiful," Penelope whispered, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. "Different from Philadelphia, I imagine," Hayes replied. "Everything is different here." She turned to look at him. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't helped me." Hayes shook his head. "Couldn't leave a lady in distress. My mother would have haunted me till the end of my days." He paused, then added, "Have you thought about what you'll do now, once you're fully recovered?" Penelope stared out at the darkened landscape. "I don't know. My uncle was my last living relative. I have nowhere to go, no one expecting me." "You could stay," Hayes suggested, his voice carefully neutral. "As I mentioned, we could use a teacher. There are families with children spread out across these hills. Some of my ranch hands have little ones too." Hope bloomed in Penelope's chest. "You'd let me teach here? There's an old bunkhouse we don't use anymore. Could be fixed up as a schoolhouse with a little work." He glanced at her. "It would give you time to decide what you want to do next." Penelope felt tears threaten again, but these were different from the tears of despair she'd grown accustomed to. "I would like that very much, Mr. Wilson." "Hayes," he corrected with a smile. "If you're staying, you ought to call me Hayes." The next morning, Penelope insisted on helping Martha with the breakfast preparations despite the older woman's protests. "You're still recovering," Martha said, watching as Penelope cracked eggs into a bowl. "I need to earn my keep," Penelope replied firmly. "I've been idle long enough." Martha's expression softened. "You remind me of my daughter, same stubborn streak." She hesitated. "Lost her in childbirth 10 years ago." Penelope reached out and squeezed Martha's hand. "I'm sorry." "Life out here is hard," Martha continued, returning to the biscuit dough she was kneading. "But it's good too, in its way. Hayes makes sure everyone's taken care of." "He seems like a good man," Penelope ventured. "The best," Martha agreed. "Too busy with this ranch to find himself a wife, though Lord knows the eligible ladies in town have tried." She gave Penelope a meaningful look that made the younger woman blush. After breakfast, Hayes took Penelope to see the old bunkhouse. It was a sturdy structure about a quarter-mile from the main house, with 2 large rooms and a stone fireplace. "It needs some cleaning and repairs," Hayes admitted, pushing open the creaky door. Dust motes danced in the sunlight streaming through the dirty windows. "But it's solid." Penelope walked through the space, already envisioning rows of desks and bookshelves along the walls. "It's perfect." Hayes looked pleased. "I'll have the boys start working on it today." "How long before you think you could start teaching?" "As soon as the building is ready," Penelope said decisively. "And once we spread the word to families in the area." Hayes nodded. "I'll ride out to the neighboring ranches this week. Most folks around here value education, even if they haven't had much themselves." Together they worked out a plan. Hayes would provide the building and basic supplies: benches, a desk, and a blackboard. Penelope would create a curriculum based on the ages and abilities of the students. As they walked back to the main house, Penelope found herself studying Hayes when he wasn't looking. There was something compelling about him, not just his kindness, but the quiet strength he radiated and the thoughtful way he approached problems. "Why did you really help me that day?" she asked suddenly. "There must be many people in need passing through El Paso." Hayes was quiet for a moment. "Something in your eyes," he finally said, "like you'd seen too much sorrow but weren't broken by it." He glanced at her. "And I believe folks ought to help each other. That's how we survive out here." Over the next 2 weeks, the transformation of both the bunkhouse and Penelope herself was remarkable. The building was cleaned, repaired, and outfitted with rough-hewn benches and desks crafted by one of the ranch hands who had carpentry skills. A proper blackboard was brought in from El Paso, along with chalk, slates, and a few precious books. Meanwhile, Penelope's health continued to improve. Regular meals and rest had restored some of the weight she'd lost, and her dress, though still loose, no longer threatened to slip off her shoulders. Her hair, once dull and lifeless, began to shine again, and the haunted look in her eyes gradually gave way to one of purpose. Word spread quickly about the new schoolteacher at Willow Creek Ranch. Hayes returned from his visits to neighboring properties, with promises that children would come, some from as far as 10 miles away. The day before the school was to open, Penelope stood in the completed schoolhouse, arranging her meager supplies. She'd borrowed books from Hayes's small collection and had created handwritten lessons on paper provided by Martha. "Looks like a proper school," Hayes said from the doorway, startling her. "It does, doesn't it?" Penelope turned to him with a smile. "I can't thank you enough for this opportunity." Hayes stepped inside, a package tucked under his arm. "Got something for you from town." He handed it to her, looking slightly embarrassed. "Thought you might want it for tomorrow." Penelope unwrapped the brown paper to find a lovely slate blue dress. The material was sturdy but soft, practical for teaching but far nicer than anything she currently owned. "Hayes, I couldn't possibly—" "It's not charity," he said quickly. "Consider it payment in advance for teaching. The families will contribute what they can: eggs, milk, sometimes coin, but I want you to know your work is valued." Penelope ran her fingers over the fabric, touched beyond words. "Thank you. I'll treasure it." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, a moment of understanding that neither was quite ready to acknowledge. The next morning, 12 children arrived at the schoolhouse, ranging in age from 5 to 16. They came on horseback, in wagons, and on foot, their faces showing varying degrees of excitement and apprehension. Penelope, wearing the blue dress which fit her much better than her previous clothing, greeted each child at the door, learning their names and assessing their knowledge. By midday, she had organized them into 3 groups based on their abilities rather than their ages. The oldest boy, Thomas, had never learned to read but was quick with numbers. 7-year-old Maria could already read simple texts but struggled with arithmetic. Each child presented a unique challenge, and Penelope found herself energized by the task. When school let out for the day, Hayes was waiting outside, leaning against a fence post. "How did it go?" he asked as the children scattered, calling goodbyes to their new teacher. "Wonderfully," Penelope said, her eyes bright with excitement. "They're eager to learn, all of them, even the older ones who might have resisted." Hayes smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. "You're a natural teacher. The way you spoke to each of them, you made them feel important." "Because they are important," Penelope replied simply. She looked down at her dress. "And having proper clothing helps. I feel like myself again." "You look." Hayes paused, searching for the right word. Alive. Like you're where you're meant to be. The comment warmed Penelope in a way that had nothing to do with the Texas sun. Perhaps I am. As the weeks passed, the school flourished. More children joined, and Penelope established a routine that included not just reading, writing, and arithmetic, but also history, geography, and natural sciences. She took the children on nature walks, teaching them about local plants and animals, and organized community readings where parents could hear their children showcase their new skills. Hayes often found excuses to visit the schoolhouse, bringing supplies or offering to fix something. Penelope noticed that these visits tended to coincide with the end of the school day, allowing him to walk her back to the main house afterward. During these walks, they talked about everything: his plans for the ranch, her memories of Philadelphia, books they had read, and their hopes for the future. Penelope found herself looking forward to these conversations, to the sound of Hayes's deep voice and the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. One evening in late October, nearly 3 months after Penelope's arrival, Hayes invited her to ride out to see a special place on the ranch. "It's my favorite spot," he explained as he helped her mount a gentle mare. "Especially this time of day." They rode for about 20 minutes, following a small stream that wound through the property. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow over the landscape. Finally, they reached a bluff overlooking a valley where part of Hayes's herd grazed peacefully. "It's breathtaking," Penelope said as they dismounted and tied the horses to a nearby tree. "When I first came to Texas," Hayes said, standing beside her at the edge of the bluff, "I was lost. The war had changed me, changed everyone who fought in it. I didn't know what to do with myself in peacetime." Penelope listened quietly, sensing he needed to share this part of himself. "I worked as a ranch hand for a few years, drifting from place to place. Then I won this land in a poker game, just a small piece at first, but I added to it over time." He gestured to the valley below. "When I found this spot, I knew I was home. First time I'd felt that way since before the war." "It suits you," Penelope said softly. "This land, this life." Hayes turned to look at her, his expression serious. "It's been a good life, mostly, but lonely at times." Penelope's heart quickened. "You have Martha and your ranch hands. The community respects you. That's not the same as having someone to share it all with." Hayes stepped closer. "Penelope, I know you've only been here a short while, but I've come to care for you, more than I expected to." Penelope felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Hayes, you don't have to say anything now," he interrupted gently. "I know you came here by chance, not choice. You might still want to move on someday, find a bigger town with more opportunities. I just wanted you to know how I feel." Penelope looked out over the valley, gathering her thoughts. When she'd arrived in El Paso, weak and desperate, she'd never imagined finding not just safety but purpose and perhaps something more. "When I left Philadelphia," she finally said, "I thought I was headed toward a new beginning with my uncle. Instead, I found myself alone and afraid." She turned to face Hayes. "But then you found me. You said my dress was too big and you'd fill me with good meals and better days, and you have." Hayes took her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "I meant every word. I know." Penelope took a deep breath. "I care for you too, Hayes. I wasn't looking for this for you, but I'm grateful to have found you all the same." The smile that spread across Hayes's face was like sunrise breaking over the plains. Slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away if she wished, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers in a gentle kiss. When they parted, Penelope felt dizzy with happiness. "What happens now?" she whispered. "Now," Hayes said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, "we take our time, get to know each other better, see where this leads us." As they rode back to the ranch in the gathering twilight, side by side, Penelope felt a sense of belonging she hadn't experienced since before her parents' deaths. The future, once so uncertain, now held promise. The following Sunday, Hayes escorted Penelope to church in El Paso. It was her first visit to town since the day of her arrival, and people openly stared at the transformation in the woman they had last seen collapsing from exhaustion on the street. "Miss Zimmerman, you're looking mighty well," the Reverend greeted her after the service. "Mr. Wilson must be taking good care of you out at Willow Creek." "Everyone has been very kind," Penelope replied, aware of the curious glances from the townspeople. Hayes stood protectively at her side, his hand occasionally brushing hers, a gesture that did not go unnoticed by the local gossips. "Folks will talk," he murmured as they walked toward the general store. "Small town and all. Let them," Penelope said with newfound confidence. "We have nothing to be ashamed of." At the general store, Hayes introduced Penelope to the proprietor, a jovial man named Samuel Green. "So you're the schoolteacher everyone's talking about," Samuel said, beaming. "My sister's children ride out to your school 3 times a week. Says they've learned more from you in a month than they did in a year with old Mr. Perkins." "That's very kind," Penelope said, pleased. "Your niece and nephew are bright children. Miss Zimmerman needs some supplies for the school," Hayes explained. "Paper, pencils, perhaps some more books if you've got them." "For you, miss, I'll check my back stock," Samuel promised. "Got a shipment from back east last month. Might have some primers and the like." As Samuel disappeared into the storeroom, Hayes and Penelope browsed the shelves. Penelope paused at a display of fabric, running her fingers over a bolt of pale yellow cotton. "That would suit you," Hayes observed. Penelope smiled. "I was thinking it would make nice curtains for the schoolhouse. The sun gets quite bright in the afternoons." Hayes nodded approvingly. "Always thinking of others." "Not always," she admitted. "Lately I've been thinking quite a bit about myself and what I want." "And what is it you want, Penelope?" Hayes asked, his voice low enough that only she could hear. She met his gaze steadily. "A purpose, a home, someone to share both with." The intensity in Hayes's eyes made her breath catch. Before he could respond, Samuel returned with an armload of books and supplies. "Found these in the back," he announced proudly. "Some geography books, a history of the United States, and 3 McGuffey Raiders. Will these do?" Penelope examined the books with delight. "They're perfect. How much do we owe you?" Samuel named a price that seemed suspiciously low, but Hayes paid without comment, adding the bolt of yellow fabric and some sewing supplies to the purchase. As they left the store, Hayes's hand found the small of Penelope's back, another gesture not lost on the townsfolk watching from the boardwalk. "You know what they're thinking," Penelope murmured. "That I'm the luckiest man in El Paso," Hayes suggested with a grin. Penelope laughed, the sound carrying across the street. "That you're courting the skinny Eastern woman you rescued 3 months ago." Hayes helped her into the wagon before climbing up beside her. "Well, they wouldn't be wrong about that." He picked up the reins. "Does it bother you?" Penelope considered the question as they pulled away from the hitching post. "No," she finally said. "It doesn't." The ride back to the ranch was peaceful, the afternoon sun warming their backs as they discussed plans for the school. Penelope found herself stealing glances at Hayes's profile, admiring the strong line of his jaw and the way his eyes reflected the endless Texas sky. Life settled into a pleasant rhythm. Weekdays were filled with teaching, evenings with conversations on the porch or by the fireplace, and Sundays with church and occasional social gatherings. Hayes formally began courting Penelope, bringing her wildflowers he found on the range and taking her for rides to his favorite spots on the ranch. As November turned to December, Penelope realized she had gained enough weight that Martha needed to let out some of the dresses they had taken in months before. "Good to see you filling out proper," Martha said approvingly as she adjusted a seam. "You were nothing but bones when you got here." "Hayes said he'd fill me with good meals and better days," Penelope recalled with a smile. "He's a man of his word." Martha's eyes twinkled. "That he is. And I've never seen him happier than these past few months with you here." Christmas approached, bringing with it plans for a school pageant. Penelope's students practiced a nativity play and memorized carols to perform for their parents. Hayes and his ranch hands constructed a simple stage in the schoolhouse and hung evergreen boughs around the room. The night of the pageant, families from miles around gathered in the small building. Children performed their parts with varying degrees of success. The youngest shepherd lost his stuffed sheep and burst into tears, while Mary nearly dropped baby Jesus, a carefully wrapped doll, but the audience responded with enthusiastic applause. Afterward, there was a feast of shared dishes: roasted turkeys and hams, pies and cakes, and Martha's famous spiced cider. Parents thanked Penelope for her dedication to their children, some with tears in their eyes. "Never thought my boy would learn his letters," one weather-beaten rancher told her, hat clutched in his hands. "You've given him a chance at something better." As the families departed into the cold December night, Hayes found Penelope standing alone in the schoolhouse, surveying the remnants of the celebration. "You've created something special here," he said, coming to stand beside her. "More than just a school, a community." Penelope leaned against him slightly. "We did this together. I couldn't have done any of it without you." Hayes turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Penelope, I've been thinking a lot lately about what you said in town about wanting a purpose, a home, and someone to share them with." Her heart began to race as he continued. "When you arrived here, you needed help. I didn't expect to fall in love with you." Hayes's voice was steady, but his hands trembled slightly around hers. "But I have. I love your kindness, your determination, the way you see the best in everyone. I love the person you've become since that first day, strong and confident. And I love who I am when I'm with you." Tears welled in Penelope's eyes as Hayes knelt before her. "I don't have fancy words or a grand life to offer you. Just this ranch, my heart, and a promise to spend every day trying to make you happy." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple gold ring. "Penelope Zimmerman, will you marry me?" The tears spilled over as Penelope nodded, unable to speak for a moment. When she found her voice, it was thick with emotion. "Yes, Hayes. Yes, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly and rose to gather her in his arms. Their kiss was tender at first, then deepened with the promise of their shared future. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Hayes rested his forehead against hers. "Merry Christmas, Penelope." She smiled up at him, her heart so full it might burst. "Merry Christmas, Hayes." They announced their engagement at church the following Sunday. The news spread quickly through town, with most people expressing delight at the match. A few young women who had set their caps for the handsome rancher were disappointed, but even they could not deny that Hayes and Penelope seemed perfectly suited to each other. Spring wedding. Martha suggested as they rode home from church. "The wildflowers will be beautiful." Hayes glanced at Penelope. "That's 4 months away. Seems like a long time to wait." Penelope squeezed his hand. "I don't mind a spring wedding. It will give us time to prepare properly, and the weather will be more cooperative." They settled on the first Saturday in April. Martha threw herself into planning, enlisting the help of the ranch hands' wives and several women from town. Penelope wrote to a former colleague in Philadelphia, sharing her happiness and requesting that a proper wedding dress be sent west. The winter passed in a blur of activity. The school continued to flourish, with 3 new students joining after Christmas. Hayes expanded the ranching operation, purchasing an adjacent property that had fallen into disrepair. Together they planned their future, agreeing that Penelope would continue teaching even after they married. "The children need you," Hayes said simply, "and you need them." "What about our own children someday?" Penelope asked, blushing slightly at the boldness of the question. Hayes smiled, pulling her closer as they sat before the fire on a cold January evening. "Our children will have the best educated mother in the territory, and a father who will teach them everything he knows about ranching." Penelope rested her head on his shoulder. "I never expected any of this when I left Philadelphia. I was just trying to survive. Life has a way of giving us what we need, even when it's not what we thought we wanted," Hayes replied, kissing the top of her head. As winter gave way to spring, the ranch burst into life. Calves were born, wildflowers bloomed across the hills, and the wedding dress arrived from Philadelphia, a beautiful creation of ivory silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. "It's gorgeous," Martha breathed as she helped Penelope try it on. "And look, it fits you perfectly now. No need for alterations." Penelope studied her reflection in the mirror. The woman who looked back at her bore little resemblance to the skeletal figure who had arrived in El Paso nearly 8 months ago. Her cheeks were full, her eyes bright, and her form shapely beneath the elegant dress. "I hardly recognize myself," she murmured. Martha squeezed her shoulder. "This is who you were always meant to be, dear. You just needed the right conditions to bloom." The wedding day dawned clear and mild, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of wildflowers. The ceremony was held outdoors at the ranch, beneath an arch of early blooming roses that Hayes had cultivated specially for the occasion. Guests came from miles around, families of Penelope's students, fellow ranchers, and townspeople who had watched the romance unfold. Penelope walked alone to meet her groom, a bouquet of Texas wildflowers in her hands. As she approached, Hayes's face reflected all the love and admiration she felt in her own heart. The Reverend spoke of commitment and partnership, of building a life together through good times and bad. When he asked for the rings, Hayes's youngest ranch hand stepped forward importantly, presenting the simple bands they had chosen. "I, Hayes Wilson, take you, Penelope Zimmerman, to be my lawfully wedded wife," Hayes recited, his voice steady and sure. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part." Penelope repeated the vows, her voice clear despite the emotion that threatened to overwhelm her. As Hayes slipped the wedding band onto her finger to join her engagement ring, she felt as though her heart might burst with happiness. "By the power vested in me," the Reverend concluded, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Hayes cupped Penelope's face in his hands and kissed her tenderly, to the cheers and applause of their guests. The celebration lasted well into the evening. Tables laden with food were set up near the house, and a local fiddler provided music for dancing. Hayes and Penelope moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes from everyone. "Never thought I'd see the day," Samuel Green told them, clapping Hayes on the back. "But I've never seen a better match." As the sun began to set, Hayes took Penelope's hand. "Ready to slip away, Mrs. Wilson?" The new name sent a thrill through her. "Yes, Mr. Wilson, I believe I am." They bid farewell to their guests and rode in a decorated wagon to a small cabin Hayes had built on the far side of the ranch, their wedding gift to each other, a private retreat away from the main house. The cabin was simple but beautiful, with a stone fireplace, a sturdy bed covered in a handmade quilt, and windows that looked out over the valley. Hayes had arranged for everything to be ready, the fire laid, lanterns lit, and a small supper waiting. "It's perfect," Penelope breathed as Hayes carried her across the threshold. "Just like you," he replied, setting her gently on her feet and kissing her with newfound freedom. Later, as they lay together watching moonlight filter through the window, Penelope traced the line of Hayes's jaw with her finger. "Happy?" he asked, catching her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "Completely," she answered truthfully. "I keep thinking about that first day, how lost I was, how uncertain the future seemed. And now I know exactly where I belong." She nestled closer against his side. "My dress was too big then. You promised to fill me with good meals and better days." Hayes smiled, running a hand along the curve of her hip. "I think I've kept that promise." "You've given me far more than I ever dreamed possible," Penelope whispered. "A home, a purpose, and your heart. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to deserve them all." "You already do," Hayes assured her, pulling her close for another kiss. Spring flowed into summer, and the newlyweds settled into married life with ease. Penelope continued teaching, now as Mrs. Wilson, while Hayes expanded the ranching operation. They worked hard during the day and spent their evenings together, sometimes at the main house with Martha and the hands, sometimes alone in their cabin. In late August, Penelope began to suspect what the increasing tiredness and morning queasiness might mean. When Martha commented that her dresses were getting tight again, but in a different way than before, Penelope knew it was time to confirm her suspicions. The doctor in El Paso confirmed what she already suspected. She was expecting a child, due in early spring. Hayes's reaction to the news was everything Penelope could have hoped for. His face lit up with joy, and he lifted her off her feet in a careful embrace. "A baby," he said wonderingly, placing a hand on her still flat stomach. "Our baby. Are you pleased?" Penelope asked, though his reaction had already answered the question. "Please doesn't begin to cover it," Hayes replied, kissing her soundly. "I'm overjoyed, excited, terrified, everything all at once." As Penelope's body changed with the growing child, Hayes watched over her with loving attention. He insisted she reduce her teaching schedule, hiring an assistant, a young woman named Clara who had been one of Penelope's first students to help with the younger children. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, with Penelope blooming in this new phase of life. Her figure, once so gaunt, now curved with the fullness of impending motherhood, and Hayes often told her she had never been more beautiful. Winter arrived, colder than the previous year, with occasional snowfalls that transformed the ranch into a glittering wonderland. Hayes made sure the cabin was always warm, stockpiling firewood and adding extra blankets to their bed. "You're fussing too much," Penelope told him one evening as he insisted on bringing her tea and rubbing her swollen feet. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass." "Humor me," Hayes replied with a smile. "I like taking care of you." As her due date approached, Penelope prepared the small room adjacent to their bedroom as a nursery. Hayes crafted a cradle from oak, while Martha knitted blankets and tiny clothes. The baby arrived on a mild day in early March 1878, a healthy boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's blue eyes. They named him William Hayes Wilson, honoring both Hayes's father and Hayes himself. "He's perfect," Hayes whispered, cradling his son with careful hands, "just like his mother." Penelope watched them together, her heart so full of love it seemed impossible to contain it all. "We're a family now," she said softly, "just as you promised. And we always will be," Hayes assured her, sitting beside her on the bed so they could marvel at their child together. William grew quickly, a healthy, curious baby who charmed everyone at the ranch. Penelope resumed teaching part-time when he was 4 months old, often bringing him with her to the schoolhouse where older students took turns holding him while she taught. Life settled into a new pattern, busier than before, with less sleep but more joy. Hayes proved to be a devoted father, as comfortable changing diapers as he was managing the ranch. In the evenings, he would sit on the porch with William on his lap, pointing out stars and telling stories about the land that would someday be his son's. On the first anniversary of their wedding, Hayes surprised Penelope with a silver locket containing a tiny portrait of William. "To keep him close to your heart," Hayes explained as he fastened it around her neck. "He already is," Penelope replied, touching the locket tenderly. "Just like you." The years that followed brought both challenges and blessings. A drought in 1879 threatened the ranch, but Hayes's careful management saw them through. Penelope's school grew to require a proper building in town, and she divided her time between teaching and family. William was joined by a sister, Margaret Martha, in 1880, and another brother, James Thomas, in 1882. Each child brought new dimensions of love and chaos to the Wilson family. Through it all, Hayes and Penelope remained deeply in love, their bond strengthening with each passing year. They worked as true partners, consulting each other on important decisions, supporting each other's dreams, and facing difficulties together. In 1885, nearly 10 years after Penelope had first arrived in El Paso, they stood together on the bluff where Hayes had first confessed his feelings for her. The valley below now contained not just cattle but orchards and fields of crops, evidence of the ranch's prosperity under their stewardship. "Did you ever imagine this?" Hayes asked, his arm around her waist. At 39, his hair was beginning to show threads of silver at the temples, but he was as handsome as ever to Penelope's eyes. "Never," she admitted, leaning into his embrace. At 32, she had matured from the frightened young woman she'd once been into a confident wife, mother, and respected teacher. "I was just trying to survive that day you found me." Hayes pulled her closer. "Your dress was too big," he recalled. "I promised to fill you with good meals and better days." "And you have," Penelope said, turning to face him. "Every promise you've made, you've kept." "I intend to keep them all," Hayes replied, kissing her with the same tenderness as always, "for all the days we have left together." Behind them, their children called out, impatient to continue their family picnic. Hayes and Penelope turned, hand in hand, to join them, two people who had found in each other not just love, but home. Over the horizon, the Texas sun cast long shadows across the land they had made their own, a fitting symbol of the legacy they would leave behind. A ranch, a school, and most importantly, a love story that had begun with an oversized dress and a cowboy's promise of better days.